Hi, you're listening to Scribble Talk, a podcast for bid and proposal professionals. My name is Bhaskar Sundaram, and with my co-host Ashley Case, we'll be sitting down with our industry veterans to share their stories, discuss their career, and learn how to make an impact in the industry. Today's guest is Tobin Spratte. Tobin started as a proposal technical writer in Las Vegas, Nevada, not knowing anything about proposals specifically. He was an excellent writer since middle school and in college and in grad school, and in the wake of Great Recession, he worked in a series of customer service and sales jobs. At these jobs, he learned simple lessons like asking qualifying questions and explaining benefits. Tobin combined those skills with his writing background and career and very quickly figured out what works and what doesn't in proposals. Nice. Spratte works by day as a proposal manager. By night, he pens novels, nonfiction, and manages and writes his blog, Anarchy+Autoimmunity. He has also been a magazine editor, academic researcher, and an opinion columnist. His columns and scholarships have been nationally published, and he was the third place winner in the Felix Morley Journalism Competition. Wow. The company who gave him his very first opportunity took a step back, so he ended up in Phoenix working for Arizona State University. But since he wanted a job where he did more writing and strategy and less checklists and compliance, he joined the engineering firm Haley & Aldrich. Tobin is a PMP practitioner qualified, lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and holds a master's degree in journalism from the University of Colorado. Welcome to Scribble Talk, Tobin. Great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Tobin, let's go back to the very beginning. Where were you born? And let's talk about your early schools.
So I was born in Colorado, in a small town that's become a slightly larger town. I say that somewhat facetiously because the whole Front Range of Colorado grew immensely, but it's basically a suburb of Denver now called Longmont. But I really grew up in Colorado Springs, and that's why I ended up in high school on the Air Force Academy. We lived about 2 miles south of there, so we officially went to high school on the Air Force Academy at Air Academy High School.
How was it studying in the Air Force Academy? Do you have any childhood memories?
Well, it was, none of my family was in the military, so it was a bit interesting to be a non-military person living in a military-driven town. But it kind of gives you an interesting perspective on the defense industry, which of course comes in handy for proposals. I think the other memorable thing there was that I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and we had to go through a whole bunch of extra security precautions when we were going back to school. We actually had to take like a month off where we didn't even have school because they wouldn't allow anyone without military credentials onto the Air Force Academy. So that was kind of interesting to work around that. Definitely caused a lot of headaches for a good year of my junior year.
Wow, that's definitely memorable. So from junior year, studying in the in the Air Force Academy, what happened next? Did you go to university college next, or did you take time off?
Yeah, so I wasn't, just to clarify, the high school was on the Air Force Academy, but the Air Force Academy itself is actually considered a university in the United States. I didn't go there because I didn't want to be in the same place I went to high school, even though I know people who did, and it would be a very good university for anyone who went there. But then you, of course, have to serve in the military too, as part of the deal. But I ended up at University of Colorado. That was where my parents went. So I guess you could say it was sort of a family thing, and it's where my younger sister also ended up too. And it was just natural. My grandparents also lived in Boulder, which is the city where University of Colorado was. And my mom was actually teaching at University of Colorado Springs at that time. She was a math teacher. So.
Wow, that's very, very, very interesting. So So you did, after your early degrees, did you went on to do masters in journalism immediately in University of Colorado, or was it?
Well, I kind of took a year off just because I was burnt out on school, and I was looking for something more than just a day job. This was 2007. One common thing you're going to see throughout my life is having to overcome a lot of adversity. So I went to high school during 9/11. I graduated college, and then 3 months later, the housing market started to fall out. And by the time I started graduate school was 2008, which was when the housing market really went downhill and started this cause of the Great Recession. So that was an interesting kind of trajectory as to why. So I think you could say part of me going to grad school was to try to harbor out from the recession in hopes that it would blow over in a couple of years. But at that time, I was thinking I might actually want to be a college professor and studying public opinion. So,
wow, that's fascinating. I think you're right. I think when you had the 9/11, that was my final year in the university. So obviously, I know like what happened to you 5 years down the line from 2001 to 8. I had it in 2001 too. And by the time I started my career, was just going along, cruising at 2008, kind of crashed pretty much. We need to go back to the basics and do. But thank you for sharing that, Tobin. So again, you were an avid writer from very early on, as we mentioned in the bio. When did you realize that you had a writing skill? Do you remember the very first piece that you wrote in any other early stuff?
yeah, it's actually kind of a funny story. So it was as early as sixth grade. I wrote this. We were supposed to write it was a work of fiction, I guess you could call it, but it's kind of a year-end project for a language arts class. And it was supposed to be about a balloon trip around the world. And so I had written these little excerpts about stops in Mexico City and Hawaii, and I couldn't even remember the other place. But it was just funny. I had written, at the top of the heading from a travel guide because my character was reading a travel guide, and it was this excerpt I wrote. And my teacher ended up giving me a D on it because she thought that I had plagiarized a good chunk of somebody else's work. And I was like, no, that was just what I wrote. I didn't understand what the issue was. And I went and talked to her, and she's like, well, the problem was it was so good that I thought it came from someone like an actual publication. So, here's a sixth grader who's being mistaken for an adult writer. I guess that was kind of both interesting and enlightening. But what's funny is I didn't really do anything with that until high school. And it wasn't until high school where I really started to consciously process I might be able to do something with this. And it was one of my language arts teachers, that's basically English is what most places call it. But she pushed me towards journalism because she really enjoyed my writing. And one of the things she liked about it is I knew how to say a lot in fewer words than a lot of my classmates. And so she thought that would be a great fit for me. And I had never even considered it, but in fact, I think I expected I was going to be an architect or an aerospace engineer in high school. And that just didn't end up working out that way. But that was really when I realized that there was something going on. The other two things that kind of happened around that time, were that I wrote these letters to the editor of Guitar Player magazine, the guitar being one of my big hobbies, and they were just little tiny things, and I didn't expect necessarily that they were going to get published, and they both ended up getting published in the issues, and I saw them, and I didn't know until I opened the magazine when it came in the mail, because I was a subscriber, that my letters had made it in. And I thought that was really cool for a 17-year-old who hadn't even been playing guitar a year. So.
That's amazing. At that time, I was just doing some basic grammars and other things during the middle school. That's classic. And then you didn't stop there. I think you went on to pen your novels, nonfiction, writing your blogs, Anarchy and Autoimmunity. Talk us through those things as well, Tobin.
Yeah, so I actually wrote my first novel at 19, but it never saw the light of day, and that's probably just as well. It's one of those things where you just kind of write that first thing just to get it out there in your head and see if it's even possible. And it was sort of a shorter piece, but I got it done, and then some friends of mine read it and they all really liked it, but I never really thought about publishing it because at that time you still had to go through publishers, and it was really, that's just, everybody knows what a pain that is, especially for fiction. I think, obviously I haven't been published officially in nonfiction other than my thesis and stuff, but I think it's easier to find a publisher for nonfiction because there's always kind of a built-in audience. Say you're into military history, or in our case, proposals. There are places that, well, we specialize in publishing military history, or we specialize in proposals. There's built-in markets. Fiction, especially the stuff that I write, which is more literary, is so nebulous that you just don't know who's going to attach onto your works and why. So in college, I actually had an opinion column in our local newspaper for a few years, believe it or not. And I enjoyed doing that. It was just a twice a month thing, and I was good at it. That was what I ended up winning the award for. I submitted my work to a nonprofit who was issuing the Felix Morley Journalism Prize. And what it was a prize for someone who was helping to convey the ideas of liberty. And so that was something I was passionate about. It came across in the columns, and that really, I think, kind of opened up some possibilities. So I ended up getting a journalism internship for a while too in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That was where things kind of took a left turn though. Again, going on this theme of adversity and resilience, the New York Times was starting to fire people left and right, and they were one of the larger papers. So, if one of these larger papers is firing people, the small dailies were getting bought out and getting consolidated. It was sort of an existential crisis for a lot of journalists. This is about 2006. And so I had to think, is this even something I wanted to do? I would talk to my coworkers who had been in the industry for 15 years and they were still only making $30,000 a year. Now, granted, again, that was 2006, but that still wouldn't have been that much better then than it would have been now. And it's like, it just didn't strike me as something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I sort of ventured out on my own at that point, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And that's what led to grad school. Meanwhile, I had started working on my first novel at the end of college, I guess it was. It was that summer I was in Pittsburgh when I started it. And I was just kind of writing a story, and I, ended up not liking what I wrote, and I ended up restarting the whole thing in 2009. So one advantage to working some rather menial jobs in the wake of the recession is it gave me a lot of time to free my head and think of ideas and write. And so that's what I did. And during that time, I also started a couple of nonfiction works that are going to probably take me a lifetime because I have a day job. But I eventually ended up self-publishing my novel. I got some friends to read it and make some edits and suggestions. And I have a pretty big group of friends, so it was great to get input from somebody who was actually running her own publishing label. And then I had another friend who was a doctor, so another friend who was a lawyer. So it's like, okay, I kind of get these perspectives in there without having to have worked or know everything about those fields myself.
Wow. I mean, looks like one event after the other event kind of fine-tuned your direction of travel there, Tobin. I mean, like that's really amazing. I think it's not easy to write, as you rightly said, but then take your writing to the next level and publish, self-publishing. You know what? I don't think I can do it, and many of our listeners might have their own, dreams of being an author or a writer. I'm sure you have inspired them, Tobin. Thank you for sharing. So,
Sure.
you also mentioned during that point, you also, worked in a series of customer service and sales job. Talk us through how was it to working in those elements, on one end and on writing on the other, and how both
Yeah,
kind of nicely helped you to enter the proposal career.
sure. So when I was in college, I needed to work jobs to have spending money. I was fortunate enough, my parents were able to pay my tuition, but they didn't have a dime more than that. So to save on expenses, I lived with my grandparents. And then I worked jobs to support my own things, that I needed to buy for school or to go out with my friends or whatever. And one of them was working at Radio Shack, which every time I tell people that, they kind of laugh, because it's been defunct for so long. But we're selling consumer electronics, which are a complicated thing with a lot of stuff that most people, even in today's day and age, don't necessarily understand. You say things. This was right when the iPod Touch, I think, was the big thing that was coming out or something like that. It was just before the iPhones. And it's like you would tell people, oh, this is a 64 gigabyte iPod. Well, what the heck does that mean? And you have to say, oh, okay, well, that holds like 30,000 songs or whatever it was. Maybe it's 15,000. But and it was just like explaining to parents the benefits outside of the features. And they actually had a pretty rigorous training program at Radio Shack, far more than a lot of electronics stores. Which is kind of amazing, considering that they ended up ultimately not being successful. But I don't think it was the fault of the people who personally staffed the stores, because we always try to be infinitely more helpful. And one of the things that I took away from that job was, again, selling and leading with benefits, talking to people, and really just being human and not just immediately cutting to the sale. Later on, I worked in a wine store. Wine is also a big hobby of mine, so it was fun to be able to do that, and get paid for it for 35, 40 hours a week. And again, you're dealing with this technical subject, because even though wine in the production instance is all about soils and geology and climates and history and agriculture and family farms and all this other stuff, ultimately it all gets distilled down to, does this taste good or smell good, yes or no? And so having to think about that consciously and realize that 95% of your customers are not interested in the soil that some obscure grape in central Italy grows in, but they might want to know, okay, how does this particular grape compare to something I'm familiar with? Or what does this smell like, in your own words? So again, it was having to distill that complex information and make it into something. So that was, again, where I learned more about how to sell, essentially.
That's amazing. The more I talk to you, the more you taught me to talk to you. From where we start, I think writing to wine to sales and customer experience. So, talk us through, being a wine nerd, Tobin. You do know a lot about wine. Talk us through about the wines from trendy regions, non-trendy regions. Share us 1 or 2 minutes of your insights on wine.
Yeah, I think so. The wine shop that I worked in, one of the big things was selling for value, not necessarily the most popular brand or the most popular labels. and finding comparable wines for way less money. So I think if I had a wine insider secret, and it's not really a secret, it's what you want to look for is quality to price ratio wines, where you're paying maybe $20 or $30 for a bottle, which I know sounds like a lot to a lot of people, but for wine geeks, that's peanuts. You know, and it's comparable to a $75 or $100 bottle. That's ideal, right? And this even works for lesser price levels. A lot of the stuff we sold in that shop was well under $20 a bottle. And that was really where you could find these 12, 13, 14, $15 wines that frankly, I would find stuff 3 or 4 times the price that wouldn't compare. And as much as I wish I could just give you the name of a vineyard or a vintner or any number of producers or importers or distributors, I probably could if people really wanted to know. But I think that the takeaway there that will apply until the end of time is that you really have to go to a wine shop where people have sampled all the wines and really know what they're talking about and trust them. You know, one of the downsides of these big wine stores is a lot of people, they only sample like half the wines in the store. They may not really know that much beyond what they've tasted, and that makes it difficult. And that's not really their fault. There's just so much product there. But wine is such an adventure. You really do need a guide for it. And, you know, I just think that's important to know. I guess as far as what's trendy, I mean, big reds have been trendy for, you know, 10, 15 years. That's your cabs and your Merlot cab blends and your Shiraz, all kinds of stuff. Untrendy things, I think a lot of people are against kind of acidic whites, or even oaked whites. Like Chardonnay hasn't really been that trendy for a long time. I think it got its welcome worn out in the 80s and 90s, even long before I could drink. And nowadays, it's, you know, people just have a harder time getting into those. They think that all white wines are supposed to taste like something, and they're so diverse. It's like, no, they're really nothing. You can just say, oh, this tastes like that or that. So I would encourage people to try grapes you haven't heard of. Go to a shop where somebody knows what they're talking about. So when you come across an Aglianico, you go and you're like, I don't know what this is or where it grows or what it tastes like. Why would I buy this? They should know the answers to those questions.
That's a good tip. I think rather than to go for this standard Pinot Grigio or standard ones, which could be from any area. You're right. I think experiment. I enjoy the wine. I'm sure some listeners might be drinking wine while they hear this, and when it published, and they will be crediting that to you.
Yeah, I think building on that, one other thing to keep in mind is that grapes are different in different regions. So you can have a cab in California that will taste nothing like a Bordeaux, even though they're the same grape. And then similarly, you can grow Pinot Grigio in Italy, in one region of Italy, but when you grow it at a much higher altitude, a much cooler climate, it tastes completely different. So it's important to keep that in mind and not dismiss things just based on the types of grape that you may have had one exposure to. So
that's nice. That's nice. So what brought you to the proposal industry?
Well, I was trying to find a use for my writing skills, essentially. And of course, I had other skills, but it's hard when you're first thinking about, okay, I have writing and editing skills. How can I apply those? So I started looking for jobs, and I'd kind of been passively looking for jobs ever since I graduated from grad school. But of course, as I said, it was the recession, and back then, as a early career / entry level, you were lucky to get an interview because you'd have people with 10 years experience having to take entry level jobs, right? So I eventually realized I was going to have to branch outside Denver. And I just kind of looked at some places I wouldn't hate living or would even enjoy living. And one of them was Las Vegas, and I found a posting, and I emailed the person who had made the post, who turned out to be the CEO of the company. And he said, well, you might be the proposal writer we're looking for. And I said, oh, okay, great. So they had a pretty intensive application process because they went through kind of this, it was a form of management consulting / coaching that encouraged hiring a certain way, essentially. And I couldn't even tell you the name of it, but I think it was actually a really good experience for me, despite people sometimes feeling like those things can be annoying, because without that, they would have just seen me as an entry-level person with awesome writing skills, but how are you really going to fit into this firm? Well, their hiring process was such that they look at beyond that, and they look at you as a person and how you might really fit into the firm. So I was eventually hired there, fit in really well. It was about a 35 to 40 person company, and I really enjoyed it. They just ran into some financial trouble, and so I ended up getting laid off, but not on bad terms or anything. And I still, have nothing but nice things to say about those people. But I had to find something else. So I ended up down here in Phoenix at Arizona State University for a few years.
Nice. How was it writing for a university? Because, considering you had a journalist background and you also had novel writing, the type of proposals that you might have done for Arizona State University might be more like grants. Is that right, Tobin? Or
yeah, exactly. And grants at the university level are mostly federally funded, but some private funding, but they tend to be reviewed by panels that you're never going to know who they are, other than that they're going to be peers in the field of the professor submitting the grant. And so they tend to be highly technical. So you really have to be able to work with very technical people, many of whom aren't used to really being bossed around at all. I mean, these are tenured professors who've made a living essentially thinking outside the box and bucking the trends and the norms. And for them to have to come in and work with a proposal manager who's trying to tell them that they have a specific time that they need something done by, it's a bit of an experience. But also just learning all the various different things. I worked on proposals that range from political science and comparative politics, which I actually knew something about. So that was a good entry into ASU. But the next proposal after that was about, band gap semiconductor materials. And it was with this group of physicists. And, I'm just like, this is so far beyond me. But I had to stick with it and at least get the gist of what they were doing, because even though they were always going to write those technical approaches and all those details I couldn't possibly begin to write, I could help them rephrase sentences that perhaps could be better written, or I could bring those benefits to the top. Because even at a university, nobody's going to read every single word of your proposal. It's just not the way that people do things anymore, and it's not what they have time for. And so you really had to kind of distill things and like, okay, what's the ultimate benefit of this? But whereas in the private industry, where I work now, it's always the benefit to your client or the value to your client. For government proposals, your customer is much broader. If it was a DoD proposal, yes, it was the DoD. But even DoD funding doesn't often go to the DoD just for the sake of the DoD. It's really about, keeping the country safe, right? And this the same thing applies to like the National Institutes for Health or the National Science Foundation, where your customer may actually be society at large. So you're thinking in different terms here, because it's like now instead of thinking about, oh, I'm going to save this person money or I'm going to make this job easier for them, you're thinking about, okay, what's the actual ultimate advantage of these particular types of proposals? And you're like, why should anybody care about some of this stuff? And for the National Institutes for Health stuff was pretty easy because it was all medicine. It's like, okay, 6 million people in the US are affected by this condition. It needs to be dealt with. Here's some research to deal with it. But the other stuff like, band gap materials for semiconductors, you have to be able to explain, okay, ultimately the applications for these are to make different types of semiconductor materials that can then contribute to chips that and process your computer processes that are faster or that might use less power or whatever, right? And so that's what you're always thinking about, that next step.
I mean, like you just did a quick short crash course on on grant writing to technical writing there. That was very useful. Again, before we get into how did you transition from University of Arizona, where you worked there, to your current role with the engineering firm, did you find any similarities in journalism, novel writing to grant writing to technical writing currently? And what was the kind of slight differences among all these skill sets, Tobin?
Yeah, I think the common thread through all of those is writing a quality sentence. If you can't do that, you're going to have a hard time writing anything. I mean, that should go without saying, and in some ways sounds a bit circular, but one of the common things that I run into is people are taught writing from like age 4 onward. So they just assume because they're 55 years old that they're a great writer. And it's like, no, that's just not the case. And so I think having all that training in journalism, it gives me some of that intellectual ammunition to explain, you don't want to use too many adverbs because it just makes it harder to read, and let's use a stronger verb here, all the way to things like, okay, this sentence is impossible to read because you've got 47 nouns and 1 verb, and we need to make that so it's more like 7 nouns, adjectives, and prepositions and 1 verb. So that's something that I think applies across that. The other skill in journalism that comes in incredibly handy, and something I would certainly share with others, is what I do in my current job also, but also did at the university. You're constantly interviewing people. If I don't understand something, especially in a proposal, then the customer is not going to understand something. So it's important that I get what's going on. My company that I'm with right now does environmental and geotechnical engineering, again, technical subject. Some of our clients are former consultants with geology and engineering backgrounds and chemistry backgrounds. Some of them are not, but they all still need to know those benefits, and they all need to have that information distilled. So by learning how to interview people and ask tough questions as a journalist, and sometimes asking the same question and being annoying about it, because if somebody didn't answer it in a way that's helpful for you or for the proposal, you need to continue to prod until you get the answer you're looking for.
That's a very interesting response. Thank you for that. I mean, like, when you were talking, I was just thinking about, how we all kind of pick up different skill sets as we enter the proposal industry, and how we all look into the same thing, but with different angles. That was amazing. Thank you. A lot of proposals, a lot of writing. Anything comes to your mind as a memorable effort, writing effort, good, bad, ugly?
Yeah, there's a couple different things. One, I probably can't really talk about at all, so I'll bypass that. I wish I could. One thing I will share from that experience, regardless of the subject matter, it involved a lot of high-level stakeholders, up to and including the governor of Arizona. And so I'm sitting here writing this proposal that has, billions of dollars at stake, with my boss and one other person at midnight the night before the red team. Actually, I guess it was post-red team. We basically had to go rewrite it in light of the red team feedback. And it was like this 13-hour grueling process. And we sat there and picked at every single sentence, but we got it done. And so that was interesting exercise in stamina as well as group work, as well as writing by committee. But ultimately I look back on it relatively fondly. The other one, I ended up writing pretty much the whole document myself with input from, of course, many different people at Arizona State University. But we'd put together this proposal on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence to a billionaire, and that's as much as I can say about it. As far as this is the subject matter and the who and what it was. But the thing that was really cool about it was because it was for a billionaire, this person we knew just by virtue of who he was, and also because this is probably something shared by a lot of billionaires, so I'm really not betraying any identities here, is they don't have time. These guys work 70, 80, 90 hours a week, most of them. That's pretty well documented. And they aren't going to sit there and read some long drawn out academic treatise on why we need to develop such and such a telescope or use such and such a tool, or, oh, if only we could do this, we could find aliens, right? Well, they're not going to think of it that way. What this guy wants to know is, okay, tell me what you need, distill it down, tell me the exact tools you need funding for, and all this other stuff. And so we ended up making this really cool looking thing that looked like a magazine that had, super accessible, large fonts, lots of call out boxes. And I'll give a shout out to my former coworker, Michael Northrup. He is now with Northrop Grumman, but he was a phenomenal graphic artist and still is. And together we just put something together that I think both of us would probably agree is one of the things we were most proud of during our time there. It had both of our fingerprints on it, and it felt like, this was how I would do a proposal in the 21st century if somebody just gave me the keys to the kingdom, so to speak.
That's beautifully said. Thank you, Tobin. That's a lot to take there. Okay, now you've entered the proposal industry you're working on. At what point did you come across APMP as an industry body? And talk us through, have you attended any Bitcoin and your certification and related stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I got into it because my boss at my first gig was like, oh, well, what kind of professional development do you want to do? I said, well, I wonder if there's an association for proposal writers. And he said, I almost guarantee you there is. So we both Googled it, and I stumbled across APMP. And that was kind of the beginning of the real beginning of my career, I think, because I had a lot of these ideas intuitively and sort of adapted them, but I was a little weaker on the management side just because I hadn't been in a project management type of situation. I'd really only managed people in retail types of environments. And so APMP really helped me understand things that I think a lot of people now take for granted, but like even just beginning with the end in mind, as stupid as that should be for most of us in common sense, that like really helped me. Oh, I guess I've been doing this backwards, because no journalist begins with the end in mind. You're always trying to find out something new. So that was a new way of thinking. But from then on, I had been in the industry about a year when I first went to, a little over a year, when I went to my first bid and proposal con in 2016, and I took my CF exam test the same time, passed, and that's kind of when I got involved. And then since then, I got nominated and awarded for 40 under 40 in 2020. And then I was on a panelist in 2018 at the San Diego conference on wrangling your subject matter experts, which I guess I must have gotten pretty good at, because I thought there were going to be a lot of other people there that were going to share their insights, and it was just me and one other person. So that was quite an experience for that panel. And then I want to get more involved with APMP really because I wanted to kind of restart the Phoenix chapter and get some in-person events going. Well, the Arizona and New Mexico chapter then was the Valley of the Sun. And we kind of resurrected it from dormancy. Some folks and I did, and then we realized after a couple of years, it was just a lot of work to keep a small chapter up, and we didn't really have the justification for all the resources. So we had the idea and we proposed merging with the California chapter. So that has since become the APMP Western chapter, which I love being a part of, and I'm currently the events director. And as part of that role, I organize monthly West Coast coffee roasts, where essentially I just moderate discussions on whatever topic I kind of come up with that might be relevant to whatever's going on in people's proposal careers. And so it's kind of a combination of group therapy, problem solving, and camaraderie and learning. So.
Nice. That's a good summary. I'm glad that your journey started with APMP and Googling it, and you managed to get to know, oh, that is an industry body, to presenting in the conferences, now even becoming a chapter, events chapter chair, and you are actually hosting events, taking the brand to the wide. I think that's the true inspiration. I think anybody who's listening, please do be part of, find your local chapters. If there is no local chapter, as Tobin mentioned, go resurrect something. There is always somebody who will be curious to part hands with you and then work together, be part of it, and then take things further. Thank you, Tobin. So we talked a lot about career, and in between you also talked about your writing. Outside this, Tobin, is there any hobbies and interests? Is there anything else you would like to say as 3 things not many people know about you?
Yeah, I think we briefly touched on this, but I actually got accepted into college as an aerospace engineer. And I guess I had thought that was going to be my calling in life or something, but I had a bit of an existential crisis summer of between senior year and freshman year of college. And I realized, you know what, it doesn't matter if I can do math and science. I don't enjoy this at all. Like, having to do my math and science homework was absolute torture for me, despite having an in-house calculus professor on tap. So in my mother. So some days I think I needed her there to motivate me. And so but the thing I never needed motivating on was doing social sciences and English and writing. So that's where I ended up, I'm going to make this change to journalism. It's a better fit for me. So that's one thing. The next thing that I had initially thought of, I think we already discussed, and we already mentioned that I write novels at night. Something else I can say instead, and again, this I think is helpful for people to kind of understand more about me, but so even though my identity and profession is tied up in writing, I really my hobby to kind of relax and get away from everything is electric guitar. I've been doing that about 20 years, own 13 guitars, and probably spend way too much time obsessing over the minutia of it. But again, I think that helps feed my understanding of how people think about things, because I realize is into these types of things as I am, like, what do I have to distill for others when I talk about that, and why it matters, or why am I passionate, and when you're getting down to like, okay, let's swap out this capacitor in this guitar in this 1950 circuit. And other people and the electrical engineers in the world might be into that, but most people are just like, I don't understand why you're spending 3 hours and paying $5 for a component made in the Soviet Union in 1970. You're like, because it affects these frequencies, which makes my guitar sound bassier, or whatever it is. So it's just fun stuff like that.
Totally. I think I'm glad that you have the get out in guitar and also writing, which is very, very important, especially when we all are isolated working from home. The
Yep.
more kind of have these outlets, it kind of brings us back into our work in a much more empowered way, or at least in a positive way. And again, that's a nice thing, Tobin. So officially, let's enter Nutters round in honor of Howard Nutt. Considering you live Phoenix, Arizona, where Howard was, it's good. We call it the rapid random fire questions round. So there is no right or wrong answer. Just go with whatever that comes in your mind. Shall we begin?
Sure.
Yeah. What's your favorite type of vacation?
Oh, well, because I live in Phoenix, pretty much anywhere that doesn't have sun, palm trees, and dry weather. So I love going places. I would love to visit Europe and tour the wine regions. I guess would be my ideal vacation. I still haven't been able to do that, partially for lack of funding and partially of finding a partner in crime to do that with. So.
Totally. And in the places that you have visited so far, Tobin, do you have any favorite place?
I really like Laguna Beach, California. There's these little coffee shops and sandwiched between art studios, and the fog rolls in there, particularly when I go in June, is by far the hottest and driest and most miserable time in Phoenix. But that's when they get the June gloom over in Southern California. And so it's like misty and crappy in the morning and no sun, and I love it. So, and I just sit there and sip my coffee on the porch, because it's still 70 degrees, or even 65 is fine with me. And I work on my novel, so it's fun.
Sounds like a nice place. So if you're only allowed to use one word for the rest of the year that you live, which one word would you use?
I guess it's overcoming. I write a lot about that in work in terms of overcoming challenges that we have on projects when we write project summaries for clients. But I think for myself, that applies also in overcoming some difficult medical things I've had to go through. Some serious transitions, just dealing with all that adversity and remembering that the adversity is not who I am, but the process of overcoming that adversity is what's made me who I am.
Totally. I think that's so nice. If you could go back to history and meet one person, who would you meet?
That's an easy one for me. It would be Alexander the Great. And the reason is because there's a series of historians who did a survey, I think it was about 15, 20 years ago, and they asked about who the most influential figure in history was. And it was a resounding, by far and away, Alexander the Great. He has influenced culture in India, in Armenia, Afghanistan, all over Europe, of course, because what we predominantly think of as Western civilization, quote unquote, is really Hellenistic culture. And that's contributed to even what you see in Britain and the US. I also just think the man himself, despite having some issues, he was very radical at his own time, and being tolerant and understanding that diverse cultures and diverse ideas can coexist peacefully, although he did have to do that under rule of the sword. So there's a bit of a contradiction there, but he's just a fascinating figure that had a grand vision, and he was also the only undefeated general in the history of the world. And that in of itself, being in the competitive proposal industry, that's just pretty cool.
That's a nice touch at the end. So you are meeting Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great asks you, Tobin, I'm hungry. Can you cook something for me? What do you think you will cook for him?
Oh, I don't know, because it would probably depend on wherever we were, because I think Alexander's, one of his virtues was at being able to adapt wherever he was. So when he conquered Persia, he ate the Persian food and tried to understand Persian culture. rather than, bringing in whatever was on the coast of the Mediterranean. So.
So what's your favorite food that you would like Alexander to
Oh, that's very easy for me. Cheese enchiladas. I'm very fortunate, and I guess it probably includes part of the reason that I live in Phoenix, to live next to some of the best Mexican restaurants in the country. And I'll put them up against anybody who wants to come and dine with me, and I'll show you what that tastes like. I also make a lot of Mexican food myself. I've taught myself to cook all that stuff. So
That's nice, Tobin. That's nice. So is there any food that you dislike?
I don't know what it is about it. I just can't stand it. Tastes totally bitter to me. It's asparagus. It's the most disgusting thing that you could possibly make me eat.
Ooh, interesting to know that one. So do you try to spend time at night without your phone?
I do. I actually try to spend lots of time without my phone. Even though it's kind of always there. I will make a habit to like walk away from it and leave it on a different level of the house. Or if I know that I need to write and concentrate, I take it and put it in another room. Because you're right, it's always there to distract you. And even though I pretty much keep it eternally silent, it's just force of habit. You're always checking something, and that's something that I probably sound like I'm 20 years older than I am in talking about this, but it's a huge annoyance of me. You can't go on a date or hang out with your friends anymore without somebody sitting there on their phone. And it's like, even though I understand it's almost an addiction for people that they can't control, it's like you got to do that if you really want to experience what it means to be human, because it sure as hell is not an iPhone.
Wow, that's super powerful, what it means to be human. Again, you're totally right, totally right. I think, is there anything that you think is hardest for you to give up?
I have a really hard time giving up sugar. I really love dessert. And I know that, in conjunction, as you mentioned my blog earlier, I've got an autoimmune condition that I've only acquired in the last 4 to 5 years. And one of the things you're supposed to do is reduce sugar intake. But try as I might to find alternatives, it's just really difficult. I don't know how people ever do keto or paleo or any of this other stuff that's just totally sugar-free. More power to them, because I can't.
Tell me about it, Tobin. While you're talking, I was nodding my head ferociously because I take ice creams or desserts every night. Before my wife just complained, you just went to the gym for like 60 minutes or 2 hours just every other day, and you just burnt everything, and now you got twice amount what you just
Yep, it is challenging. I'm kind of the same way, and I try not to be, but what I tell myself is, okay, if I'm going to eat this stuff, I need to go to the gym. So that's my own personal agreement.
That's right. That's right. So if you were to write a book about yourself, considering you have written a lot of books, what would you name it?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to say I have no idea what I would name it. It would be almost impossible to come up with that title, because it would depend on what aspect of my life I was writing about, I suppose.
I'm sure overcoming will be there as a title.
Yes, something along those lines, I think, or at least an allusion to, perhaps.
That's nice. That's nice. I'll leave it to you to ponder it. So that's the end of the Nutters round, rapid random fire questions round. Hope you enjoyed it. Let's move into people in your life. So who are the people who have been the most influential in your life and career?
So I'm kind of all over the map in this, as I touched on some of them earlier with my English and literature teachers in high school. They just always did a great job and got me interested in those things. And I think is part of the reason that I've become a writer and chosen to write my own novels. And even I still read half the stuff they probably assigned me and I only passively paid attention to back then. I also had a French teacher who was just a very good French teacher. I mean, I still remember a lot of French to this day. And her name was Madame Davis Emery. Unfortunately, she'll never probably hear this podcast, but if she did, she should know that her lessons had come in handy for studying humanities and wine labels. So, and even interacting with some wine merchants. Another huge person, when I was in college, I had a professor I worked with. I don't want to say his name because he's a pretty private guy. And I won't even say what he was working on because that would be way too obvious. But suffice it to say, in the time I spent working with him, he became world renowned for even in the media for something. But one of the things that we always worked on, we were just talked about what it means to be human. That is kind of the question that was at the heart of everything we did. And it does apply to proposals, is what do people think and why do they think those things that they think? And we looked at that from, of course, a public opinion question. And for him, it was a matter of democracy that was at stake. And for me, it was a matter of freedom that was at stake. And yet, despite that, for both of us, I think we agreed on that. And it kind of influenced a lot of how I thought. Some other people I'll quickly go through. There was somebody a psychologist in grad school who diagnosed me with ADHD. And I just have to say that I think that mental disorders are a lot more common amongst all people. Certainly statistics say as high as 1 in 5. But I see a lot of people with anxiety disorders and ADHD in the proposal world. And I just want them to know that, like, there's other people that are out there that are dealing with the same issues you are. Anyway, this guy kind of, just by diagnosing me, he gave me, he put me on meds. And that was like, somebody once said that it was like looking at the world through glasses for the first time after being horribly nearsighted for most of your life. And that was like, wow, did that open things? I could suddenly read things that I never would have read because I didn't have the patience or whatever. Then I think beyond that, I'll give a shout out to my former boss at ASU, Faye Farmer. She was instrumental in showing me how to juggle multiple competing proposal deadlines and learning to prioritize stuff, setting up a block schedule, and especially something she probably thinks of herself as good at, but may not understand how good she is at it, is commanding a room when pretty much everyone in there makes more money than you or thinks that they're more important or that they're smarter than you. And she just never acted like that ever scared her. And it's something I've always tried to channel. And then a quick shout out to a couple of our fellow APMP members, Kristen McComber and Marsha Lindquist, both for helping me get my CP, and then Kristen with helping me with some capture stuff, and Marsha with being a great mentor just in general, and even a friend. So
you have so much abundance in your life, Toby, and I think I just want to wish and pray that you continue to build all these new relationships and also celebrate your past relationships. I think it's super nice. Thank you for sharing. Who haven't you spoken or seen in a long time, and you hope that they're doing okay?
Probably my good friend Mike. He was my best friend during high school, and we still are very close, but we just don't talk all that often. He's very busy. He actually works as a firefighter, so we have about as opposing schedules as you can get. But he recently had a daughter, in addition to already having a stepdaughter. So I always think about him and wish that we could hang out more.
That's nice. I'm sure he will listen, and he will you will be meeting him very soon. Thank you. So You have been in the industry for well over, we don't know, a few years now, but you also had a long career of writing. But what's the one common myth about the proposal profession that you want to debunk?
I think it's that, for me, I think it's the leadership without authority. I think no matter what I do or where I go in my life, whether that's leading as a thought leader in my novels, or contributing even more than I already hope that I am to the company I currently work for, I really want to emphasize the importance of that, not only in my own life, but also for all great proposal managers. I mean, there's going to be so many times in life you're going to be faced with people who outrank you, who make more money than you, who have 1,900 more degrees than you'll ever be able to obtain in your lifetime, or might have written 20 books, but I'm not going to let myself be intimidated by the Stephen Kings, who are far more prolific than I am, or people that make more money than I am, or the people who, even in my own company, I always treat people the same with respect. And I think that thinking about that, and then being able to lead and not be afraid of those situations and assert myself without coming off like a jerk, is just a very helpful, powerful skill. So
Nicely put there, Tobin. Tobin, going from there, is there any other advice you would like to give to the bid and proposal professionals?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've actually kind of observed lately is that there's not as much of an emphasis on pre-positioning as there should be. It's something we're working on in our own firm, but I realize a lot of companies are set up that you've got a salesperson or a capture person, and they just kind of hand off proposals to you, and then you put them through a system. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the software that's out there these days kind of encourages that model, because they want the people who do the proposals to be true proposal experts and nothing else. But if there's a theme throughout this whole discussion, it's been that you have to understand human beings, and not just en masse and how we think psychologically at large, but also your customers and what they care about. It doesn't matter if they're the same company, even in the same division. They might have completely different concerns that for the people that are reading your proposal. And I think that we really, as an industry, need to put more emphasis on taking advantage of that. I know we tend to call it capture, but I know in our firm, we're calling it that, but even that can kind of scare people away. What it's really about is understanding people and caring about their needs and their choices, and channeling that into your proposal. And you're never going to be able to do that if you don't enter the proposal until the RFP drops. And even if you're restricted in that environment, I would say that you need to be actively communicating with the salesperson or capture manager as much as possible. If you're not involved in the blue team review, you should be. If you can get even further up the buyer's journey, then that step, all the better. The more you can be involved in affecting and influencing the customer's decisions up front, the easier it is to write a proposal, and the much happier you're going to be and the people that you work with.
That's really best. I mean, that's something that we really drive part of the Scribble ethos, how to become a full stack bidder. I mean, don't just go before proposal, and even if possible after proposal, just so that you understand how the relationship gets converted into a proposal and the proposal gets converted into a contract. That's beautifully said there, Tobin. Thank you so much for sharing. Tobin, starting as a writer, worked through customer experience, wrote novels, moved on into university, grant writing, then to the proposal industry, supporting APMP Western chapter. A lot more. We talked about abundance in your life, wine. What's next for you, Tobin?
I always kind of say this is a tough question to answer, because my life has been kind of chaotic right when I first think I got something figured out. some massive event like a recession or a 9/11 or, getting an autoimmune condition that you never thought you would have to deal with when you're, younger. I just want to be a better person than the day I was before. And that, means a better guitar player when it comes to guitar. It means a better writer when it comes to my novels. It means a better person when it comes to interacting with my friends and coworkers. And for my company, it means being better at my job and putting more of myself into that and being able to take on more responsibility and affect more change. So if that is at my current firm, great. If life takes me in another direction for whatever reason, who knows, then that would be fine too.
Brilliant, Toby. So you have reached the end of the podcast. So if there is any part of your life or career or is there anything else you would like to say to the listeners, now is the time to say, Toby.
I think just hanging in there and really being involved in things like this podcast and in getting to know other professionals in the industry. There's so much to learn from people. And one thing that I will say in leading these coffee clatches, I probably talk as much as anybody because I have to moderate the thing, but there's always somebody in there that has just as much or more experience than me and always has a nugget that I like to take away and apply to my own situation. And they may not even know that, but I think that it's always helpful to network and look for people that can offer you that sort of advice. And APMP is a fantastic way to do that. But of course, there's other channels too, whether that's LinkedIn or within your own firm or just, all that other good stuff. So.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Tobin. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us at Scribble Talk, Tobin. Wish you, your family, your loved ones, and your colleagues, friends, everybody, all the good health and happiness. Continue to stay healthy, continue to inspire us. So looking forward to meet you in the coming days, coming months.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks so much.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit batchuscribble.com/podcast to listen to this episode and check out any of our other previously recorded episodes. If you've enjoyed today's interview, don't forget to subscribe, review, and share the Scribble Talk podcast. We hope you'll check out our next episode where we interview another industry expert and special guest. Until then, it's Ashley Kays,
Bhaskar Sundram,
signing off.